Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me as always, the counter-transference to my transference, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing today, Ken?
I'm exceptionally well. Thank you very much for asking, Rory. How do you find yourself today?
I find myself wet. I've just been outside and Counselling Towers is absolutely immersed in water. It's raining.
Like it. Well, we don't have a wet episode today. In fact, we have an important episode. And I think maybe an episode that I would like to ask right at the top of this episode that you might share with your peers, students on counselling courses, but not just that, actually practicing counsellors. It's important topics that we're covering today, specifically the first topic that we're going to be opening with, and that is self-harm. This has been in the news quite a lot recently. There is definitely a rise in the reporting or the identification of self-harm, and Rory and I are going to be speaking about that and giving you some really good links to some further training, research and reading that you can do. Going into practice matters. Now, this is an exciting one because I'm reading from my clipboard, and today practice matters. Now, practice matters is basically where we take important stuff that links into the practice when we're actually in with the client. We're going to be talking about shrinking people. So I have this picture in my mind, Rory, of you wheeling in the shrinking ray. Tell us what we can expect.
Well, you know, one of my CPD sessions many years ago was to use the shrinking ray gun. And the people we're shrinking maybe are those people in our client's history who may have been abusers or have been neglectful or maybe have been really bullying. And I think part of a therapist's role is to help clients realise where they are in the here and now. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we shrink people of the past who may have been nasty or horrible or abusive to clients. And it really does link to what is being talked about a lot in the profession at the moment, which is trauma-informed practice.
Like it. Looking forward to that one. And we're going to be ending episode 87 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast looking at something which, again, is of the moment if you're listening to us live, and that is placements. And we're going to be speaking about smart placement searching. And it's important that that first word is there, that smart placement search, because getting a placement is very, very important. But getting the right placement, that is more important, and more on that as we get to that section. But starting off with a very, very serious topic, the topic of self-harm. Rory.
Yes, well, I was drawn to some research done by the British Medical Journal, and if there's anybody doing any research, the British Medical Journal, which is the journal published for the medical profession here in the UK, is one of the most authoritative sources of information you can find, because their research is peerless. It really is, and also it's peer reviewed. So I'm not sure if that's an oxymoron, that peerless and peer reviewed, but what I'm trying to get over is the high quality of the research. That's what I'm trying to get over, and it's peer reviewed. So before they publish anything, they have other doctors look at it and other researchers before it goes, because it goes to the medical profession, and doctors and medical professionals make their opinions on what is actually published in this periodical. And I was drawn to an article that said 70% rise in incidence of self-harm in teenagers since 2011. 70% rise. Just get that headline figure. 70%. And it's predominantly in children aged 13 to 16. And it's predominantly, although not exclusively, in female students.
Yes.
Not to put too fine a point on it. And it's becoming an area of concern, and there's some other research, and I'm going to put a lot of links into the page. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com, find the podcast section. When this podcast is published, you will find lots of links. There's another podcast with the researchers talking about it. If you are in a placement where you're working with children or other professionals, please share this. It is just a stunning figure, isn't it? 70% increase.
It is. It's astounding, and I think we need to start off by kind of maybe giving a definition of what self-harm is. And before we do that, I just want to share with you an eye-opener for me. I had the opportunity to work as a counsellor within a college, so working with the exact age group that you've kind of mentioned there, Rory, about 15 to 18 years old. And I was in placement for just a short period of time. I was standing in for a colleague, and I was very surprised that around 70% of the presentations that walked through the room were self-harm related. It really is massive. It was surprising for me, and I instantly went and did some searching about to do some CPD so that I could increase my understanding and my knowledge about self-harm. So you are likely to come across self-harm either from a client saying that they are maybe self-harming, or maybe from a family member or loved one saying that they have a family member that is self-harming. So swatting up on this is important, and it's not a requirement of your course to pass your assignments. It is, I think, just good practice for yourself as a counsellor. So Rory has already given you the where you can find all those links. It's counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tabs, go to episode 87, and all the links are going to be there for you. So Rory, can we kind of start off just by defining what self-harm is? What does it look like? What might a person who is self-harming do?
Well, I mean, the spectrum is very, very wide, but generally speaking, cutting, using sharp objects to cut arms or legs. A lot of people will cut their legs because it can't be seen. Sometimes poisoning, sometimes trichotillomania, which is pulling of eyelashes, pulling of hair. The list really goes on. Anything really that damages someone. And what we have to be very careful of is when people present with this, we don't want just to think it's just a silly teenage fad or they're being silly. In years gone by, one of the ways of punishing self-harmers, they would go to A&E, and this is a long time ago, and certainly isn't the practice now. I want to make that clear. But a long time ago, maybe in the 70s, they would stitch the wounds up without any anaesthetic to teach them a lesson. Can you believe that? And now, of course, we're more well-informed, and it realised it basically is a cry for help. When someone self-harms, it can be a cry for help, or it can be that the physical pain of the self-harm masks the emotional pain that they're going through. That's my observation, and that's what other professionals conclude. And in fact, that's what the clients that I work with, because like you, Ken, I was a school counsellor, and usually that was it. They would self-harm because they were going through so much emotional pain. The physical pain just took the mind off it, quite frankly.
100%. Kind of going into why people might do that. There is a release. There is a reported release in self-harm. There is often a cycle attached to self-harm where the acting out process will be the harming of self, whatever form that may take. And then following that, immediately after and during the self-harm, there is a release. There is a distancing from the pain that the person is feeling. And the physical pain is manageable, it is controllable, and it is controlled by them. Whereas very often the emotional turbulence that might be going on in that young person's life at that time is not controllable by them. It might be external, it might be parents, it might be teachers, it might be the course it might be their friend base. It's not controllable by them. Where the pain is, they get to be in full control of that pain. And there is an immediate release followed by a almost instantaneous feelings of guilt, self-remorse. Why am I doing this? I'm finding myself here again. That's it. I'm never going to do this anymore. I can't believe I keep on finding myself in this position. And then there is usually a kind of a little honeymoon period where that's it now. Look how well I'm doing. I haven't done it for a long time. I may have thought about it, but I'm not going back to that until the pressure builds up to the point of breaking point again, where the person feels that their only way of release from that is to re-self-harm, and they find themselves caught in this perpetual cycle. Within that perpetual cycle, you're most likely, and not always, of course, most likely to have somebody present asking for help after a recent self-harm incident where they may be going through that remorse, guilt, shame, what can I do about this. And I think it's really important to be warm, compassionate, understanding, empathic. Rory, when you mentioned that how self-harm was dealt with in the past, really it sent a shudder of disgust through my body. These are human beings that are struggling, and that is their way of coping. They don't need judgment, they don't need persecution, and they also don't need panic from a counsellor of, oh, self-harming, we better put a whole pile of stuff in place. Yes, we need to work considered, and yes, we do need to look at putting support in place, but the first point of contact is to be understanding, warm and non-judgmental for what the person is bringing. We don't say to them, oh, we know, you know that's wrong, don't you? Or you need to stop that, because that's what they're hearing all the time. As counsellors, we're there firstly to warmly accept them as they are.
Here, Ken, is what I would say to that. And also, there's a couple of observations about self-harm that may be useful. Sometimes people self-harm almost certainly because they want to mask the emotional pain they're going through. But some people actually like to see blood. So it's useful to really engage and have that conversation. You know, when someone says they're self-harming, don't kind of put it on the back burner or kind of put it to one side. Engage immediately with it and say, you know, can you tell me why you're self-harming? And I used to ask my clients, is it the pain or is it a mixture of the pain and seeing the blood? Because sometimes certain people will get a massive amount of release when they see blood. So really do engage with it. You know, there are some safe self-harming practices if you can self-harm yourself safely. You know, if you can get the young people away from using any form of blades, because the danger there is clear contamination, and also they may seriously cut an artery, and you know, that can lead to death. It may bleed to death. Things like holding ice, that's pretty painful. And also, I used to have a big package of elastic bands in my little case that I used to carry around, and I used to give them that and say, flick that, it hurts like heck. Put the elastic band on your wrist, pull it as fast as you can, give it a flick. It hurts like hell, but the worst that someone's going to get is a nasty welt or maybe a bit of a bruise. Far better than cutting and maybe doing some really serious damage. And again, another play, if you're not sure about how to work with self-harm, get yourself some information. Do that CPD. Do that research as Ken did, because if you're working in a school, it's going to be something that comes up a lot.
Definitely. And you know, the release that comes from the pain. And Rory, I think you've touched on such an important point there, where we got to look out for the dangers of things like infection, cross-contamination. Very often the self-harm process is hidden. So long sleeves might be worn to hide cut marks on the arms. It's hidden from the family, so it's very, very secretive. But the person could be harboring an infection that can be making them really, really ill. So being aware of that, really, really important. So the physiological the payoff is that when we harm our body, when our body is harmed in some way, our body compensates by releasing hormones, endorphins, and natural opioids to help us cope with the pain. This is biological. And in the self-harm process, those same chemicals are flooding the body. And there is an element of addiction to those chemicals, as we speak about the runner's high and all of that. And there can be a seeking for that, and at the same time the soothingness of that, and the maybe release from the emotional turmoil that person may be facing at that time. So I wanted to kind of just go back to where we started in terms of what you might see that. It can be from biting, it can be sticking one nail underneath another nail and pushing until it really hurts. And Rory, you mentioned something really interesting, poisoning. And I have worked with presentations of this. And what's really important, there may be cutting of the wrists. There may even be cutting of the neck close to the jugular vein. This is not suicidal behavior. It is far removed from suicidal behavior, but it can very often come across as looking like suicidal behavior. And it can, sadly, when it goes wrong, also result in the person's death. But Generally, when you speak to someone who is self-harming, they will identify it as self-harm, not as a suicide attempt, even if it is on the wrists or near the jugular. And it is not their intention to end their life. It is their intention just to escape the pain that they are carrying within them at that moment. Such an important topic. Please share this with everyone you know that works in psychological health. Share this episode. It is episode 87, Counselling Tutor Podcast, counsellingtutor.com, podcast tab. Episode 87. The notes are there. The additional reading is there. The links are there. Serious topic.
Absolutely. And, if you know someone who is affected by this, and almost certainly I think people who listen to this podcast will, help them get some help. There's lots of help out there. And we're going to really pack this episode's pages on the Counselling Tutor website with lots of links for support, because we know it's such an important topic, and one that sadly is becoming, not to put too fine a point on it, an epidemic.
Indeed. And Rory and I have had a recent meeting. We get together once a year where we discuss Counselling Tutor. We discuss what our goals are for you, where we're taking the resources and how we intend supporting you. And one of the topics that we did discuss at our recent meeting was self-harm, how prevalent this is at the moment, and how we can add further support. And we are in the process of planning a lecture that will be available in the Counselling Study resource at some point during this year, we hope, on the topic of self-harm, where you may get some more information if you are a member of the Counselling Study resource. So, moving on, because practice matters, and we go into practice matters each episode. Practice matters, we take an element of what we may see in practice. And Rory, today you're bringing shrinking people, and you kind of told us in the beginning that there's no shrinking rays involved. It's more working with a client who may have suffered something where they hold a person, their abuser potentially, or somebody from their past, and that fills up a big space in their life, and it's about maybe shrinking the impact of that person. Have I kind of got the right thread here?
You're on the right track, Ken. You're definitely on the right track. Yeah, it's clearly, I guess, again, a case of transference. When someone thinks about something that's happened in their past, they're seeing themselves as they were in the past, maybe as a child, and the abuser as they were in the past, which is usually an adult. But therapy takes place in the here and now. And part of a therapist's role, I believe, is to help the client see where they are in the here and now, and to make them aware that that person in the past isn't the person they were in terms of the power they have over them. So I'm going to be talking about Rory's incredible shrinking ray.
Looking forward to that, and we're going to hear more about Rory's incredible shrinking ray after this short message from our sponsor.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
First of all, I don't own a shrinking ray gun, so sorry about that. However, there are times in therapy where it is useful to help clients shrink people who may have been hurt them or abused them in the past. Shrinking is basically helping clients exist in the here and now and not be overwhelmed by images or reflections of the past through the phenomena known as transference. And transference is where we're transported back to the past with all the attendant thoughts and feelings. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, while out shopping, my wife pointed to a frail old man and reflected that his name was, well, Bill Smith, we'll say. And did I remember him? Instantly, I was transferred back to my school days over 45 years ago. He was a particularly brutal teacher who delighted in hitting boys with a cricket bat. For a few seconds, I was consumed by the thoughts and feelings I had as a schoolboy who attended his classes all those years ago. Yet seeing this frail old man with a walking stick brought me back to the here and now, and the reality that he had no power over me. In fact, should I have sneezed particularly loudly near him, I suspect he would have fallen over. If I hear his name again, it will be the image of a frail old man I'll recall, not the young athletic teacher with a cricket bat. And that really is the power we can help our clients harness in therapy. Did you see what I did there? By thinking of him as a frail old man, I've shrunk him.
he's a smaller person. And I'm not thinking about the past, I'm thinking about the here and now. So how do we achieve this in therapy? Well, the first thing is if a client feels vulnerable in the therapy room talking about an abuser, remind them they're in a safe space. This is just so important, because by reminding clients they're in a safe space, you keep them in the here and now. Sometimes for clients, it's almost like they're in a form of a time machine when they're talking about something and they're transported back. This is sometimes called disassociation, where sometimes clients start to disassociate. They may stare into the middle distance as they're thinking about what happened in the past. They're not in the here and now. And crucially, they're not the adults they are now. They are the children they were. So it's really useful to make sure that clients realise that the therapy room is a safe space, that they can talk about things and they're talking about it in the here and now as an adult. Sometimes it's useful reminding the client they're no longer a child, and as an adult they hold the power. It's amazing the vestiges of the past that people carry into their adulthood. I've lost count of the times I've said to clients that, you're an adult now, and as an adult you have the power. And this can sometimes be quite surprising to clients who still have those vestiges of feeling like a frightened child. But if this is supported and this idea is put to them, it's actually the truth. And it's amazing how many people can actually see that they're actually a different person. They're not the person they were in the past. Gently reflect to the client that the person holds no power over them now and that they're in control. I think this is so important. The vestiges and the connections of the past can be very, very powerful. But as a therapist saying to the client, this person has no effect on your life anymore. They're not in your life anymore. They don't have any control over your life anymore, if that's the case, can be very powerful, and it can split and cut those transferential links that the client may have carried for years. Get the client to speak to the frightened part of them as if they were talking to a child. What would they say? This, of course, speaks to inner child work, and inner child work is exactly that. The adult part of the person speaks, self-soothes and supports that frightened child. And it's a very effective intervention in therapy because it allows the reality the client has, that they're an adult, that they're older, that they're more experienced, that they have the power, and they can literally talk to that frightened configuration of themselves and to be able to self-soothe and self-control themselves. Incredibly important. If it's safe to do so, use two-chair work. Two-chair work is sometimes referred to as empty chair, and it's an idea from Gestalt. It has to be done thoughtfully and with a lot of consideration. But it's amazing that if you get a client to speak directly to someone from their past, they speak to them as an adult, not the child they were. This is so important. And as they speak and talk to this person, who of course isn't in the chair, which is why it's called the empty chair, they can say exactly what they want, a luxury that wasn't afforded to them in the past. And I've experienced lots of people using empty chair work, both as a trainer, a student and a therapist. And I can tell you it's mighty powerful. The ability to be able to talk to someone, get your point across, and to be able to take full control, basically, while the other person can't say anything because they're not there. So two-chair work can be really, really useful. Finally, by helping the client stay in the here and now, as the adult they are, you don't really need a ray gun to shrink abusers from the past. They reduce in size all by themselves.
Thank you, as always, Rory. It's so informative, it's important, and it is something that you're going to see in your practice when a client comes in and they hold a person, an abuser, a thought in their head of something big. And if you want to get the blueprint, the diagram, the making diagram to make Rory's super shrinking ray, in other words, his super duper handout, then you can get that. And it's free. You just go to counsellingtutor.com. click on the podcast tab, go to episode 87. That's this episode. All the links discussed in this episode are available there, and you can download Rory's handout from right within the page at no charge, just by putting in your email, and we will send that to you. Of course, if you are a member of our paid-for resource, which is called the Counselling Study Resource, well, that has already been added to your resource handouts vault. You can just log in and access it. It is there awaiting for you. If you're wondering what the Counselling Study Resource is and how you can join to help support you during your counselling training, more information of that will be at the end of our episode. But we're now going into our final topic for episode 87, and that is placements, but not just placements, smart placement search. It's the right time of year, Rory.
It is, and I had a lovely conversation on our Facebook page, and if you don't know what our Facebook page is, then really you should be there. If you search Facebook and put in Counselling Tutor, you'll find two pages. One is a closed group with over 19,000 like-minded people in. All you do is click to join and we'll let you in. And the other is our business page. And if you like what you hear, give us a review and give us a star. We always like that.
No, 5 stars, please. Not one. We don't like 1 star.
Yeah, if you have 5 stars, that'll be lovely. So, looking for placements. And on this little conversation I had in the Facebook page, someone had been struggling for placements. And it was interesting. They did a Google search, and the Google terms they put in wouldn't have been very helpful at all. So I just gave him a little Google search, and I just told him to put charities plus counselling plus where he lived. And just click on it. And he said, wow, he said the whole thing opened up. And it does remind me many years ago when I was working for an organisation. I was qualified, and he had a cafeteria in the base. And someone came in and asked the cleaner, the cleaners were just doing the cleaning up because it was the end of the day, if there was any placements. And the cleaner said no, because he'd asked the wrong person. So we're going to talk about smart placement, how to find them. And my top tip is, first of all, actually tutor. Good training organisations should have solid links to placements, because they should be liaising with them. It's part of the triangle of placement, college, supervisor. That triangle should be really strong, and everybody should know exactly who the trainer is, who the placement is, who the supervisor is. So the first place really is ask your trainer if they've got a list of placements. I think that's a good starting point.
It is, and when you have that list, you then have some choice of agencies that you may wish to contact. And I'd like to address mindset on this. Both Rory and myself work as clinical supervisors, and we will work with supervising placement counsellors that are maybe doing their placement in agencies. And you get to hear kind of what that journey is like. And of course, that is a confidential conversation. But what I can share with you is that not all placement agencies are equal. It's about you and your practice. Keep that in mind from the very moment you sit down for your very first hour with your very first client as a placement counsellor. You are in practice, and it is your practice. You are the counsellor, and you are in practice in your placement. And you need to make decisions on how your practice is going to look. And it's important that you are supported. It is really important not that you just get a placement, that you get the right placement that is going to have the support around, that is going to act ethically in the interests of your clients, because that's what you would do in your practice. So examine their policies and their procedures and ask questions when you get to interview, and you make the decision, is this somewhere that I wish to do my placement? There's often the thought of, oh, they are honouring me by letting me come and ply my skills in their placement. Well, you're working for no fee, and you're bringing the expertise that you are learning on your course that you are paying for. You have a lot to offer. No agency is doing any placement counsellor a favour by giving them a placement. It is a mutually beneficial relationship for you and the placement agency, and it needs to be that. You need to be supported. You need to be held. It needs to be a professional environment where there is accountability, policies, procedures that reflect the ethical framework to which you work. So ask questions when you go to interview.
Absolutely. And I can remember on my first interview for a placement, it was a group interview, and there's lots of people there. And there was a qualified practitioner who was going for accreditation, and she turned up for a placement because she wanted to get her accreditation I was in. And I was sat next to her having a conversation, and I hadn't even got into practice. I was not only wet behind the ears, I was positively dripping. And I can remember her saying, she went in and she said, "Can I see the rooms?"
Oh, yes. Love it.
Can I see the rooms? And I was like, "Oh, how brave's that?" in this voice. "How brave's that?" and when I became a lecturer, I used to go and ask them to see the rooms. No one should have anything to hide. So if someone came to my practice and said, "Can I see the rooms?" I'd say, "Of course, come in, have a look. Is there anything you're looking for particularly?" And I think it's really, really important. So the first thing is make sure that it's a place you'd be happy to be counselled in. And if you're not, then you've got to ask the question, would you want that for your clients?
100%. And there is so much. I think it's worth, before going into placement, making a list of questions that are important to you and to your practice. Think about you, think about your practice. Maybe in your mind, think about yourself 5 years from now, and what does your practice look like? Well, for you to get to that picture you have in your mind, certain things need to be in place. Ask the questions at placement interview whether they are in place and if it is a good match for you.
Yeah, and another top tip is all you need for this is a pen and paper, and to turn up on the day when maybe another training group, because most colleges run a first and a second year diploma. So turn up on the day the second years are in, wait until they go for their lunch, and then wander around with a piece of paper and go, "Hello, I'm Rory, I'm doing the first year. Where's your placements?"
Yes.
Start making a list.
Yes.
And they'd be happy, and also they'd love to see someone from the first year as well and catch up. But just go in and say, "Where's your placement? Make a list and get a view. Is it all right? Are the people nice? Are they supportive?" And you can get a real sense before you go in. That's another top tip. It's a lot easier to find a placement for those by asking those people who put my mouth in, who are already in placement. That's what I was trying to say.
I like that. That really is a top tip. And maybe if you don't have access to anybody within your university, your college, your learning institution that is doing a placement, if you go for an interview and then they come back to you and say, "Yes, we'd love you to do a placement here," you can, of course, say, "Before I make my final decision, I would love to maybe speak to one or two of your other placement counselors just to get a feel." You kind of hold more aces than I would imagine. Hold on a second. It's my turn to change gear here, Rory. I'm now presuming what everybody is thinking. Experience shows from speaking with people who've gone into placement that they sometimes consider that the agency holds all the aces, and you hold more aces than maybe you would know. You've got the latest learning, which is fresh. You are eager. You're going in and you're offering a great service there. Couple of things when you are looking for a placement. So this is when you get to interview stage. There is the consideration that placements are very, very rare and very difficult to get. And I think this is a myth. And I can explain why I think that this myth has been propagated and is passed around. Is you may contact an agency and you may leave a message on an answer phone saying, "Hey, my name's Ken and I'm just coming up to the part of my course where I can go into placement, and I would love to find out if I can do a placement at your agency." And then you hear nothing back. Oh, shock, horror. So there is that consideration of, "Oh, wow, it's really tough. I've phoned 3 agencies and I haven't had one reply." So here's what's going on that you can't see on the other end of that phone. Many agencies are running on the minimum staff to be able to deliver the service. The agencies are traditionally funded with external funding, and funding is tight in all areas, specifically within the UK, after all the cutbacks. And very often, there is no big buzzing office where people are answering phones, taking messages and getting back to people. Usually, not usually, sometimes, I can't say usually, sometimes there's just an answer phone that is maybe checked once a day, and the messages are written down on bits of paper to be handed to the right person, and it can be that that they're busy with other things and they can't get to that. So here's my top tip. Ask, and then ask again. Ask, and then ask again. If you phone an agency that you believe you'd like to do a placement in and you don't hear anything back, contact them again and say very politely, I left a message before, nobody got back to me. I just want to tell you I'm really passionate about what it is that you do. I'd love to meet with someone. And again, leave the messages, write a letter if you don't hear anything from the phone calls. Be persistent.
Yes, that's the thing. Don't give up. And also, just to remind everybody, the sweet spot, if you like, for gaining placements is usually kind of between November and December. What happens is that the placements work out that you probably do all of September and October doing part of your course, which is professional and organisational issues, looking at ethics, confidentiality, and then they start to recruit, usually November time. And also another sweet spot is at the end of the academic year, and the reason for that is because people are leaving. They get their 100 hours in, and they may want to take a break out of practice, or they may get jobs and move on. And that gives, just before the holidays, that gives a bit of a gap in provision. So those are my top tips, really. You know, certainly November time, and also maybe June and July, just before people are going on holiday, contact them again, because that's when practice managers will be looking at counsellors leaving and having to keep the service going. So give it a go there.
I've got one last a takeaway, and this is a personal one. That those who have listened to Counselling Tutor podcast for some time maybe have an idea that I'm passionate about counselling skills. It's kind of my area of passion and focus. One of the questions I would highly recommend that is asked when going to a placement is, what is your policy around the recording of sessions with clients? Ask them, and I'll tell you why. If you record your sessions, if you are able to get permission from the agency within a boundaried contract and from the client that you can use those recordings for your own development and for reflecting back on to kind of look how your skills are developing, and maybe even for using parts of that, because you're likely to be writing case studies on real client work, obviously removing all the identifiable data for your final portfolio assignments, etc. Having recordings is really, really helpful. Looking back to Carl Rogers mentions in a quote, and I don't remember the quote exactly, but he mentions that it is by far the greatest learning tool that he found during his time practicing and lecturing in this subject. And he would speak about how he and his students would gather around the recording machine and listen back and reflect on how the skills were being used and what effect those skills had within the relationship. I have worked as a supervisor, as mentioned before, and I've had supervisees who have mentioned, I'm not allowed, I can't record skills within my placement. So it might be an idea to ask when you go, if you want a list of questions, there's maybe one to put on there. What is your policies around recording of skills, and how is the client protected? Is there a contract in place around that?
Yes, absolutely. And there are some places where you will absolutely will not be able to.
100%. Yes.
And that's places like prisons, and also maybe places where you're working with survivors of rape and abuse, because there may be ongoing court cases. Always worth checking out. But yes, there are placements out there, and they're nearer than you think. I think it's just a case of finding them. But if you use those top tips that Ken and myself have shared with you, I'm sure that your placement finding journey will be a lot easier.
You know what, Rory? I'm just thinking we're going to need to do a placement workshop at some time, because the top tips are kind of coming up as we go here. I could fill up another episode of Counselling Tutor Podcast with all the top tips, and I think it's a very real topic. It's a concern for many. Will I get a placement? Will I find the right placement? So maybe that's something we could look at. And hey, why not put your voice to this? If you think that Counselling Tutor Rory and I should hold a finding a placement workshop, maybe online on the internet, then let us know, and you can do that just by popping into our Facebook group. Rory's already told you where to find that. It's Counselling Tutor in Facebook. You'll find it. Knock on the door. We'll let you in and add your voice to this. Speak about what questions you might ask if you go to a placement, or what questions you did ask. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we'll have to put that in the diary, but your views count. So if that's what you want, you tell us in the Facebook feed, or you can even drop us an email. You'll find our email addresses certainly on the Counselling Tutor page. Just drop us an email. We'd be really interested to hear from you.
They're difficult to remember, our emails. Mine is ken@counsellingtutor.com, and Rory's is rory@counsellingtutor.com. So there it is. It is episode 87, Counselling Tutor Podcast. I hope you've got some benefit from this. I know I have. And again, a call out. Please share this episode, because we did kick off with something really important, not just to students, but to anybody working in a therapeutic capacity, and that is the topic of self-harm. Rory in Practice Matters covered shrinking of people, and we looked at smart placement search. This has been episode 87.
Yep, and as always, at the end, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.